Welcome to Research Reflections, where we explore science and health research in a gentle, relaxing way. In each episode, I share interesting research explained simply so you can stay informed and curious without ever feeling overwhelmed. So if you'd like to learn something new and perhaps feel a little calmer along the way, you're in the right place. Let's get started. Today, I'd like to share a study that caught my attention because it touches on a question that many of us wonder about. Does it matter if we squeeze our workouts into a couple days or spread them out across the week? This study looked at whether so-called weekend warrior workouts, big efforts on just 2 days per week, can deliver the same fitness benefits as exercising more frequently throughout the week. The study is called Cardiorespiratory Fitness Improvements Following Low-Frequency Training Are Not Inferior to High-Frequency Training Matched for Intensity and Volume, and was published in the Scandinavian Journal of Medicine and Science in Sports in 2025. The researchers worked with 28 healthy adults, 14 men and 14 women, ranging from 18 to 45 years old. They were mostly sedentary or only lightly active before the study began. Certain individuals were excluded from participating. These included people who were pregnant, were taking medications that could affect cardiovascular or metabolic responses to exercise, endurance trained for more than 3 hours per week, had donated blood in the past 90 days, smoked, or consumed more than 21 units of alcohol per week. The goal was to ensure healthy but not highly trained participants, so the results would reflect typical recreationally active adults rather than elite athletes. The study lasted 8 weeks. Participants were randomly assigned to one of two groups, the high-frequency group, who exercised 4 times per week, and the weekend warrior group, who exercised just 2 times per week, but for twice the duration in each session. In the weekend warrior group, the workouts were done on back-to-back days, mimicking people who only have time to exercise on weekends. Importantly, both groups did the same total weekly exercise volume and intensity, so the only difference was how the workouts were spread out. Training was performed on stationary bikes under supervision, though 4 participants had to train remotely a couple of times. Sessions included steady, continuous cycling at moderate intensity and high-intensity interval sessions with short bursts of very hard effort followed by recovery. Another important detail is that training intensity and duration were gradually increased over the 8 weeks. This progressive increase ensured that participants continued to receive an adequate training stimulus and didn't simply adapt to the same workload week after week. Before, during, and after the study, the researchers measured many aspects of health and fitness, including, but not limited to, VO2 max, a measure of aerobic fitness, blood parameters like hemoglobin mass, muscle oxidative capacity, which tells us how efficiently muscles use oxygen, time to task failure, or how long participants could sustain a demanding cycling effort, changes in fuel usage during exercise, like how much fat versus carbohydrates were burned, neuromuscular function, testing how muscles responded under fatigue, and subjective feelings like perceived exertion and fatigue. It's worth noting that the study gathered quite a bit of data. I won't be covering every detail today to keep things simple, but if you're curious, you'll find the full paper linked in the description below. One important note about the study design. Instead of including a no-exercise control group, the researchers chose to compare the weekend warrior training to a high-frequency training protocol that's already known to improve cardiorespiratory fitness. This helped them directly answer whether the low-frequency approach was truly inferior or not. However, it also means that we can't say with certainty how much of the improvements were due only to the training versus other possible factors over the 8-week period. After 8 weeks, both groups significantly improved their VO2 max. Importantly, the weekend warrior group was not inferior to the high-frequency group in improving VO2 max. Specifically, VO2 max increased by about 7 to 9% in both groups. These improvements are typical for endurance training and show that frequency did not significantly alter the gains in aerobic capacity. In other words, squeezing workouts into 2 longer sessions per week seemed just as effective for improving aerobic fitness as spreading them out over 4 days. This finding agrees with other studies suggesting that improvements in aerobic threshold and VO2 max do not strongly depend on how often you train, as long as the total weekly effort is the same. One interesting observation: the body mass of the Weekend Warrior group went slightly down, while the high-frequency group's body weight stayed about the same, though both groups reduced their body fat percentage. However, the study was not specifically designed or controlled for weight loss, so you should not read too much into this difference. Both groups also showed interesting metabolic changes. For example, steady-state energy expenditure during exercise decreased after training in both groups. This was mainly because carbohydrate burning decreased while the percentage of energy coming from fat increased. Fat oxidation rates themselves didn't change dramatically, but the body shifted towards using more fat overall during exercise. Blood lactate levels at the end of a heavy cycling session were also significantly lowered in both groups after training, suggesting better metabolic efficiency. The researchers also measured total hemoglobin mass and vascular volumes. Both groups showed small increases in hemoglobin mass and blood volume after training, but there was no significant differences between the Weekend Warrior and high-frequency groups. These changes are consistent with typical adaptations to endurance training, which can help improve oxygen delivery during exercise. Another finding was related to muscle oxidative capacity, which reflects how well muscles can use oxygen to generate energy. This was measured using near-infrared spectroscopy. Muscle oxidative capacity increased significantly in both groups after the first 4 weeks of training, but didn't show further significant increases between weeks 4 and 8. Importantly, there is no significant difference between the 2 training frequencies in these improvements. This suggests that both lower and higher frequency training can effectively enhance muscle metabolism over a relatively short period. When we look at the bigger picture, the authors concluded that the total weekly training volume seems to be the key factor for improving cardiorespiratory fitness, not necessarily how often you train. This makes sense because many physiological improvements, like those related to lactate thresholds or VO2 max, depend more on the total exercise stimulus rather than frequency. They also speculated about an interesting possibility. The Weekend Warrior group, who got used to longer workouts, might actually develop greater durability for longer endurance tasks, like a 60-minute effort, compared to those in the higher frequency group, who typically trained for shorter durations. Being accustomed to longer sessions might improve mental and physical resilience during extended exercise. Another notable point was that both groups experienced reductions in perceived effort and fatigue ratings over time. So even though the workout schedules were different, participants in both groups felt their training became easier as they progressed. Physiologically, the authors discussed that both protocols, high frequency and Weekend Warrior, seemed to produce similar overall adaptations. This suggests that the so-called adaptive impulse in the body was comparable between the groups. Some key insights include the magnitude of exercise stress per session was higher in the Weekend Warrior group because their sessions were longer. The frequency of signaling pathways stimulated by exercise was higher in the high-frequency group since they trained more often. One possible mechanism the authors mention is glycogen depletion, which could be greater in longer Weekend Warrior sessions, but muscle glycogen wasn't directly measured in this study. Ultimately, the main driver of exercise stress appeared to be exercise intensity, not session length or frequency alone. The researchers also noticed that neuromuscular fatigue measures, such as maximal voluntary contraction and muscle twitch ratios, improved similarly between groups, reinforcing the idea that training frequency may not significantly influence muscle fatigue resilience. It's worth mentioning that the study included both men and women. While some minor differences appeared in certain measurements, such as blood parameters and fatigue scores, overall, the patterns of adaptation were quite similar for both sexes. This suggests the findings likely apply broadly to both men and women in a healthy, recreationally active population. As always, there are some experimental considerations. On the positive side, this study had strong experimental design, including randomization and matched training volume and intensity. And they used many sophisticated measurements, providing rich physiological data. On the downside, the study was relatively short-term, only 8 weeks, so we can't be sure how differences might emerge over longer periods. The sample size was small, just 28 people, and the participants were sedentary to recreationally active, so the results might not translate perfectly to elite athletes or people with medical conditions. Still, the data are robust and informative for healthy adults. So what's the practical takeaway? This study suggests that for improving cardiorespiratory fitness, it might not matter much whether you train 2 times per week or 4 times per week, as long as your total weekly exercise volume and intensity are similar. That's an encouraging message for people who may only have time to exercise on weekends. But as always, this is not medical advice, just sharing research so you can make more informed decisions. Thank you for spending your time with me here today on Research Reflections. I'd love to hear your thoughts, questions, or experiences related to what we discussed, so feel free to share in the comments below. If you noticed anything I might have gotten wrong, or if there's new research I should know about, please let me know. I'll make sure to pin any corrections or updates in the comments so everyone has the most accurate information. If there's a particular paper or topic you'd like me to explore further in a future video, I'd love to hear your suggestions. If you'd like to keep exploring interesting research in a peaceful, relaxing way, consider subscribing and joining me for future episodes. Until next time, take care.